One of the more remarkable poets of American literature and world literature, for that matter, is Robert Frost. Frost was born in the mid 1880s, so he was very much anchored in the Victorian era, the era of realism, that the somewhat uh, realistic and grounded sensibility that dwelt in real things and real sentiments, let's say. And but by the time he was growing into adulthood, and he really didn't find success until he wasn't a boy wonder or anything like that. He found success when he was in his 30s. His That started to come about in the age of high modernism. So he's an interesting figure to watch as he bridges that era, and you can see him experimenting with different modes. And while he always presented himself as a kind of good gray poet in the Tennyson, Whittier, Whitman mode, the somewhat avuncular New Englander of common sense and real things. The poetry itself is oddly modernist in its activity, and the themes and modes that he deals with are not the surfaces at all. He is continually confronting surfaces and ruminating on them and looking into things and saying, okay, this is more than it appears to be, and leaves it to the reader to draw those conclusions for themselves. Sometimes he has some fun with presenting things that are very clearly not what he says they are. He deals with unreliable narrators. He deals with confounding images, with conflicts and contradictions, and he leaves it up to the reader to understand what he's getting at, and thus he also gives himself a plausible deniability and out to say, well, of course I never meant that. Which is a little cagey of him, but there's something cagey about him. There's something, quite honestly, almost dishonest about the way he represents himself. He always represents himself as the good great poet, as the New England farmhand, the crusty rural type, when in fact he was born in San Francisco, spent most of his childhood there, saw his first success as a poet really while he was living in England and London. So the crusty New Englander is a little bit of a facade that he put on. Certainly, he spent most of his life, later life, as New England, cultivating that. But that was after he was essentially established, and his poetry sort of has fun with that. The setting of so many of the most famous ones is very much hard scrabble, rural New England, a world of woods and rocky fields and snow. But he's always offering these landscapes as a facade, as something to be dwelled upon and looked into for a kind of inner drama that the mere outline of realism would tend to shy away from. Here he pushes into modernism and the uses of language and symbols in a way that it gets remarkably sophisticated for somebody who is supposed to be so homespun. One of his most notable, well, some of his most notable early poems are relatively short, and there's again, a somewhat beguiling simplicity about them until you start to look at them and realize that, well, okay, it's not just homespun stuff. There are some very disturbing and deep ruminations going on here. One of the more remarkable ones is An Old Man's Winter Night, Again, he's writing this as not quite an old man. I think he was in his 30s when he came about it. But he's already seems to be projecting into the future this personification of an old man, the crusty, gray-bearded New Englander. And but the thoughts that go through that head, that once he has that character, the thoughts and the emotions and the questions that arise from that character are rarely short of remarkable. An old man's winter night. All out of doors looked darkly in at him. Through the thin frost, almost in separate stars that gathered on the pane in empty rooms. What kept his eyes from giving back the gaze was the lamp tilted near them in his hand. What brought him from remembering what it was that brought him to that creaking room was age. He stood with barrels around him, at a loss, and having scared the cellar under him in clumping there, it scared once again in clumping off, and scared the outer night, which has its sounds, familiar, like the roar of trees and crack of branches, common things, but nothing so like the beating on a box. A light he was to no one but himself, where now he sat, concerned with he knew what. A quiet light, and then not much, and then not even that. He consigned to the moon, such as she was, so late arising, to the broken moon, as better than the sun in any case for any such a charge, his snow upon the roof, his icicles along the wall to keep, and slept. The log that shifted with a jolt once in the stove, disturbing him as he shifted, and eased his heavy breathing, but still slept. One man can't keep a house, a farm, a countryside, or if he can, it's thus he does it of a winter night. Dark. The portrait is of an old man who wakes up in the middle of the night. These things happen. Sometimes your sleep is a little restless. It happens to anyone. It happens particularly to older gentlemen, perhaps. Sometimes it's a prostate problem. You got to get up 7 times a night to pee. But there's more going on here. He is feeling in all of this rumbling and all of the little noises that you hear in a silent night, so to speak. All the rumblings of mortality. The banging on a box is, a box can easily be a coffin, and is somebody knocking on his coffin? Is he already in a coffin and he hears it from outside, or is he on the inside of the coffin and hears it knocking from the inside? Or is somebody else knocking on the coffin from the inside who has already left and he is hearing it? And why would he be hearing it if he is alive? Well, maybe he's not alive. All of these questions start folding in on one another, but they're all conveyed through the mood, through the images, through the sounds more than anything. This is a poem of sounds, and it's quiet, easy cadence. It's simple little free verse form is a poem of sounds and mood. And he is so expert at setting that mood of quiet rumination and somewhat eeriness, somewhat disturbing quality as thoughts turn dark in the middle of the night. And dark in a couple of different ways here. The darkness of the fact that it is a broken moon, as they call it. So in a rural setting without a lot of electric light, a moonless night, or let's say a waning moon night, it's very, very dark. So there's the darkness that is physical, but also this is a dark night of the soul, so to speak. This is this old man sitting there looking out through the pane. Again, a play on the word pain, sort of like Joyce there, P-A-N-E versus P-A-I-N. He is looking out through the window and seeing nothing but darkness. There's darkness within, there's darkness, there's more darkness without. And he is perhaps looking through that window. When you look through a window where it's darker outside than it is in, he is also looking at himself, because there is going to be a little bit of a reflection, even if there are no lights on inside. What kept his eyes from giving back the gaze was the lamp tilted near him in his hand. That tells me that he's holding a lamp so he can see the outside, or he can see through there. He's holding a light. There's no light outside. He's looking at himself. It doesn't say that so explicitly here, but that's the painting that's being painted for you. And it becomes a question of interpretation. It becomes a question of reading into things. We're not given a lot of the thoughts that actually occur to him. We're just told about some of the sensations, some of the sounds that he hears, and we're led to believe that he is drawing meaning from them in a certain way. And we can't necessarily access that meaning. We have to interpret it on our own, and that is that's always a dicey business, because we are dealing with a very dark perspective. Now, at the end, it seems somewhat natural. The conclusion at the end is: an aged man, one man, can't keep a house, a farm, a countryside, or if he can, it's thus he does it of a winter night. This suggests that he is all alone in this house. There is nobody else there, which, the quietness might underline, but at the middle of the night, you can't really tell. But here it's said that, okay, he can't quite keep a house. He is getting too old to keep a house or a farm or anything. He can't quite take care of himself. Mortality is knocking. Does he answer? Does he admit that I can't do it anymore? The crusty, independent New Englander needs to bend to the inevitability of mortality. This is a very dramatic moment. But it's also a moment of some resolution, because this is a moment of crisis, let's say. He is being given the offer. Maybe he is contemplating suicide at this. Maybe this is a moment where he is doing a gut check and saying, well, okay, I can't quite do this anymore on my own. I am getting too old. I'm too infirm. Maybe I'm not as clear as I used to be. Maybe I'm not as strong as I used to be. Maybe I need to move off the farm. And that evocation of a kind of helplessness before nature, as he is staring out into nature, a dark nature. Does he give in? Does he accept that he can't quite do it anymore? And if so, is he contemplating suicide here? Is he going to kill himself rather than find himself in an old age home? It's just a question. But the poem asks this question and offers it up, and we are invited as readers to ruminate on it. And because it's so indistinct and so informal, we can't help but identify with it. There's nothing poetic about this in the 19th century form of the term. There's nothing highfalutin about the language. There's nothing particularly structured about the poem. But it seems like an old man quietly thinking out loud. And so we're drawn in. It doesn't seem like art. It seems like reality. And it draws us in by natural human empathy. It is, of course, a poem, so there's a little bit of a falseness there. And he is using some poetic technique in the meter more than anything else. He's trying to sound very normal, very natural. It is a very simple speaking voice, and the arrangement of the lines are very structured in a very subtle way, but it's a way that's designed to not look arty. And that just adds to the effect. That just makes you lean in all the more. That just makes you all the more susceptible to those dark thoughts, because ultimately, when you start considering that man's perspective, you have to consider what it means for you. If you were in that position, would you want to kill yourself? Would you want to face down that darkness? It's a curious and disturbing moment. The that notion of the old New Englander confronting a New England winter and using that dark night of the soul kind of drama is one he will return to repeatedly throughout his career. Frost. One of his more famous ones is called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, which deals with a lot of the same physical notions, but puts a little bit of a different spin on it. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Similar situation as the previous one. It's an old man looking into the woods. Well, it's a little undetermined as how old he is. He's a little older than he was in the previous poem, but still not an old man. But here you have a man, a figure, let's say, it's not necessarily gendered, staring into the woods on a dark winter night. And there's most conspicuously now we get a very regular rhyme and meter. The poetic qualities of it are a little bit more in your face. They're a little bit more accentuated. So this is something that is a little bit more arty, let's say, a little bit more aestheticized. But there's still that sense of staring into the unknown, that sense of confronting a darkness within by looking out. Whose woods I think these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though, so he's all alone. You know, this is somebody who is beyond the reach of man at this point. We will not be stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. So he's outside society, and the snow is falling down. You can read snow a number of different ways, but it is generally it is traditionally a symbol of death, of forgetting, of a kind of frozen quality, literally, but also figuratively. The only other creature in this poem is the horse, and he imagines somewhat whimsically that the horse is sort of wondering what he's doing here, as if the horse can really think that abstractly. But there is a communication, at least, but it's only with the horse. So again, the idea that he is deeply, deeply alone, and yet he is sitting there. Even the horse realizes that it's weird to be standing out there and staring at these deep, dark woods, but he's still doing it. The character is still doing it. And the only thing, and again, think how quiet the poem is. There's not that much going on, except the only other sounds, the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. Now just imagine something so quiet that you can hear the snow fall, Um, it's dark and quiet. So, again, a familiar setting for Frost. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep. Um, he likes things dark and deep. What's in them? What is the draw? It's probably just pitch black what he's looking at. Um, what's in the woods? What is drawing his attention? There is something dark and deep within them that is drawing his attention. What is dark and deep? Well, then you're into Dark Night of the Soul territory again. The idea of some truth that is beyond humanity, so isolated from civilization, so isolated from society, that you can only confront it when deeply alone, when you can't help it. But I have promises to keep. There is something drawing him away. There is something drawing him back. He can't stay. He can't sit there and dwell within this, dwell within this darkness. So while the old man on a winter night was perhaps contemplating killing himself because of confronting the darkness that he sees outside and all around him, here the speaker, the poet, is perhaps drawn towards that, but no, I can't. I have promises to keep. I have responsibilities. I have something. I have attenuations to society I have to get back to. I am still needed in the world, unlike the old man. And he has miles to go before he sleeps. And he repeats that line, miles to go before I sleep, miles to go before I sleep. And that is very well quoted. Again, tends to be misquoted. But that notion of almost a yearning for the sleep of death, to rest. He needs to turn away from the possibility of rest, because he has promises to keep. But the journey is arduous. The journey is one he has to repeat to himself, to convince himself that he has to do it. I have miles to go before I sleep. I have miles to go before I sleep. It's like he's trying to buck himself up for the journey, when all he wants to do is cash it in, let's say. That's one interpretation. One of the more whimsical versions of this same essential darkness, however, comes in Fire and Ice, a really cute little lyric that he's talking about some really horrific things. When he's taking on essentially the end of the world, Book of Revelations type stuff, and it's kind of playful. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to know that for destruction ice is also great and would suffice. Which is charming in its little sing-songy way. And he is talking about the destruction of the world. He's talking about the destruction of the universe. He gives it a little bit of a human spin, saying, okay, I've tasted of desire. Maybe Mr. Frost is getting a little frisky. Mr. Frost is getting quite hot, let's say. And I've tasted of desire I hold with those who favor fire. Well, if you gotta go, you gotta go. And, let's make it a good one. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate. So, it's like that would be my first choice. But if you gotta do it again, all right, sure. Ice is fine too. I think I know enough of hate, which is, again, a sense of he responds to a physical manifestation of something interiorly. I know enough of hate. I have felt hate and desire in my heart. And so it can find some resonance, some comfort in an outward manifestation of fire and ice, because I know inside what is hate and what is desire. I can relate. Now, he doesn't necessarily equate those, but he just says that, all right, that is ice, that is fire. I know both inside, and so I am okay with it. I respond to it because of what is inside me. It's a fun one to dwell on. The character of the good gray poet of New England is constantly being twisted around and darkened in a way that the good New England Brahmins of a previous generation would never really go. There's a peculiar darkness to it that is very, very modern. Desert places. Snow falling and night falling fast, oh, fast. In a field I looked into going past, and the ground almost covered smooth in snow, but a few weeds and stubble showing last. The woods around it have it, it is theirs. All animals are smothered in their lairs. I am too absent-spirited to count. The loneliness includes me unawares. And lonely as it is, that loneliness will be more lonely ere it will be less, a blanker whiteness of benighted snow, with no expression, nothing to express. They cannot scare me with their empty spaces between stars. On stars there is no human races. I have it in me, so much nearer home, to scare myself with my own desert places. Again, he's looking out at the stars. He sees darkness between the stars. Yeah, okay, there's light there, but let's talk about the darkness in between. It's kind of a tick of his, let's say. But he is equating that, or he is drawn to that, perhaps, because he recognizes it in himself. There is the interior and there is the exterior, and he is seeing them as somewhat metaphorical for one another. They are representative. And so it's a very sophisticated intellectual relationship between them of symbol and meaning that is almost imagistic in its construction. And here we're getting into modernism, quite frankly. We're getting into the puzzle over symbols, of making poems that are naturally symbolic or representative, because poetry is supposed to be difficult. Poetry is supposed to be something that isn't so homespun and appealing to any old farmer who wants to, pull up a chair at the end of a long day outside and sit by a fire and open up a book of poetry. Poetry is supposed to be a puzzle, because life is also a puzzle. And so they make the drama of poetry about the decoding of it, about the reading into it, the unpeeling all the many layers of meaning that belie any sort of concrete understanding. Frost gets his most imagistic, I would say, in one called Design. It's very short. I found a dimpled spider, fat and white, on a white heel-all, holding up a moth, like a white piece of rigid satin cloth. Assorted characters of death and blight, mixed ready to begin the morning rite. Like the ingredients of a witch's broth, a snowdrop spider, a flower like a froth, and dead wings carried like a paper kite. What had that flower to do with being white, the wayward blue, and innocent heel-all? What brought the kindred spider to that height, then steered the white moth thither in the night? What but design of darkness to appall, if design govern in a thing so small? On the one hand, he's writing about a spider eating a moth, but it's symbolic. There's clearly something going on here. He's writing in concrete images, which to me suggests that he's working with some of the influence that he gets from Ezra Pound when he was sort of listening to Ezra Pound. This notion of dealing in concrete images and not necessarily explaining any of them, and just making it about unpacking meaning as best you can as a reader. And here, it's creepy. There, we're talking about we're talking about the animal world. Yes, it's very natural and very logical in its own way, but it's also bestial. It's also quite cruel and indifferent to morality. We're talking about eating. But the poem works is very artfully constructed. It is a very regular rhyme scheme, a very simple meter, and it has almost, again, sort of an innocent little homespunny quality that people would look like, oh, look, it's a little spider poem. It's so cute. But what he's dealing with there is some, is significant darkness again. And he extrapolates there, not explicitly, but certainly implicitly. What but design of darkness to appall, if design govern in a thing so small? Well, if God mandates that animals destroy one another, is that a moral God? And does that apply to humanity? Is there a scale on where these rules apply? If humanity is not supposed to kill and eat one another, what about the animal or insect realm? At what point do ethics and morals kick in? Where is the overall logic of this? And can we say with any confidence that it is being monitored by an omniscient being? So there we're going from, a simple little poem about a spider to questioning a universe of chaos or of order. It plunges you into these mini debates about very existential, fundamental questions of being that tend to have no certain or comforting answers at the other end of it. All you can do is try and puzzle it out yourself, which is not very comforting. Another. The people along the sand all took and looked one way. They turned their back on the land. They look at the sea all day. As long as it takes to pass, a ship keeps raising its hull. The wetter ground like glass reflects a standing gull. The land may vary more, but wherever the truth may be, the water comes ashore and the people look at the sea. They cannot look out far, they cannot look in deep, but when was that ever a bar to any watch they keep? Once again, looking out at nature and seeing some sort of resonance in it. And he is here maybe criticizing the human beings who are looking out at the water and maybe not seeing anything. They cannot look out far, they cannot look in deep, but they're doing it anyway, even though they don't see. A little bit of a critique on people who just go through life without considering these things. He seems almost jealous, perhaps. It's his job to go and consider all of these dark things that he's always dwelling on and confronting all of these horrors mentally and emotionally. But other people just look and see, oh, okay, I can look out there and see things. And you get the New England aspect of it. It's like he's walking on a beach on let's say, Cape Cod, and he sees a ship out there, and okay, yeah, that's a nice ship, and it's all very New Englandy. But that's always the surface. Frost works on beneath the surface. He paints all these lovely pictures, but the implications in them are deeply, deeply disturbing. They are not homespun. They are not comforting. They are, if anything, they are harrowing to a degree that no other modernist can really approach. He is almost seducing people with the charming rhyme and the cozy images of nature and the world around him and the rural settings and the New England stuff and all of that. He's drawing you in almost like a spider until you're stuck in that. And it's very hard to break out. It's very hard to put that back and say, all right, well, that's all very nice. The images haunt. The interpretations stay with you. The questions won't leave off until you are like the old man on the winter night, staring out, looking into the darkness and seeing your own reflection at the same time. Those thoughts of mortality, those thoughts of meaninglessness in a world you cannot understand, those thoughts of suffering that just can't be avoided because you have miles to go before you sleep.